Anne McCaffrey is one of the preeminent science fiction writers of all time, and I want to talk about her because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I put together 10 little-known facts about Anne McCaffrey, but first, let's answer the question, who was Anne McCaffrey? Anne McCaffrey was born in Massachusetts in 1926 and died in 2011 at the age of 85. She is mostly known for her Dragonriders of Pern series, which is science fiction, by the way, even though it has dragons in it. The dragons are a race of creatures on another planet where humans have arrived by spaceship, and they develop telepathic bonds with the dragons. It's science fiction, I'm telling you. The Pern universe was responsible for Anne McCaffrey being the first woman who won the Hugo for the novella Where Search in 1968, and the first woman who won the Nebula for her novella Dragonrider in 1969. The first Pern novel was Dragonflight, which combined both of these novellas. She became a Grandmaster of Science Fiction in 2005 and was inducted into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame in 2006. In other words, she was a big deal in the science fiction community. And I was really delighted to have found an online autobiography, which I'll link in the description below, which I encourage everyone to read. And she also did her own autobiography in book form if you want to pick that up too. So anyway, here are 10 little-known facts about Anne McCaffrey.
Number 10.
Anne McCaffrey was discovered by none other than Hugo Gernsback, who published her first science fiction story in 1953. And yes, that Hugo Gernsback, the one who had the Hugo Awards named after him. And as mentioned before, she was the very first woman to win the Hugo for her novella Where Search. And want to know something else that is a weird coincidence? Hugo Gernsback founded the first pulp science fiction magazine, Amazing Stories, in 1926, the same year Anne McCaffrey was born. Was it a coincidence or something else?
Number 9.
Anne McCaffrey was a singer, and not just any old singer, but an opera singer. She was a dramatic soprano with a 3.5 octave range. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds impressive. She met her husband, Wright Johnson, through their mutual love of opera. In fact, he was also a singer. She studied stage direction under Frederick H. Robinson, the director of the Lancaster Opera Company, who was the inspiration for her Pern character, Master Harper Robinson. Yes, singers or harpers are integral characters not only in the Pern universe, but in another of McCaffrey's series called The Crystal Singers.
Number 8.
Anne McCaffrey was a horse girl. She began riding at Girl Scout camp when she was 10 years old on an elderly horse named Chief. While her family couldn't afford to own an actual horse, young McCaffrey would save whatever money she could for riding. After her divorce in 1970, she and her children emigrated to Ireland, where she would spend the rest of her life, and it was here where she was able to acquire her first horse, Mr. Ed. She would eventually establish Dragonhold Underhill near Dublin, her home that had an extensive array of equestrian facilities that spread across 30 acres of land, where she also became a horse breeder. She called her home Dragonhold, saying it was the house that dragons built because, her money came from books about dragons. It also kind of makes sense that she would draw from her own love of horse riding that inspired her books on dragon riding, kind of like her opera singing inspired music in her stories.
Number 7.
Now, you may think that the personalities of dragons are also based on horses because of her love of horses, but that's not true. Anne McCaffrey was also a cat person. Yes, McCaffrey said cats had more similarities to dragons than horses, calling them much more intelligent than horses. Her love of cats started when she was lonely as a child and didn't have any friends, so she transferred her affection to their pet, Thomas Cat, which she called a monster of a Maine Coon with 7 toes on his front paws. She had cats throughout her life, and cats or cat-like creatures would pop up in many of her books, like No One Noticed the Cat, a fairy tale she wrote for her granddaughter, and The Bark Cats, a series that she co-wrote with Elizabeth Ann Scarborough.
Number 6.
Anne McCaffrey was the first woman science fiction writer who made it to the New York Times bestsellers list, and that was for her novel The White Dragon, published in 1978. Now, the very first science fiction novel to go on the New York Times bestsellers list was Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land in 1961. Back then, science fiction really had a poor reputation in the world of literature, which frankly kind of still exists today, but back then it was even worse. So it was a big deal whenever you saw a science fiction novel hit those lists. I can't actually remember which is the first Pern book I read, but I think it may have been White Dragon. And McCaffrey credits the success of The White Dragon, at least in part, to Michael Whelan's cover art. And I won't argue, because I distinctly remember that book catching my eye because of the cover. I mean, just look at it. On the other hand, Michael Whelan claims that The White Dragon was a turning point in his career because it was the first book with his cover that went on the New York Times bestsellers list.
Number 5.
Anne McCaffrey served as the Secretary-Treasurer of the Science Fiction Writers of America from 1968 to 1970. According to McCaffrey, one of the chief aims of SFWA at the time was to help new writers and improve the standard of science fiction and fantasy stories. Apparently, she handcrafted the Nebula Award trophies during those years, which seems insane. Her responsibilities included production of 2 monthly newsletters and distributing them. Apparently, she considered this position a blessing in disguise because she was suffering from what she called vicious insomnia, and it helped her fill up those hours. And these were also the years that led up to her divorce, so take that for what you will.
Number 4.
One of Anne McCaffrey's goals when writing about dragons was to overturn the idea that dragons were evil. Today, there are so many books where people bond with dragons, but Anne McCaffrey was the first to do this. And for some reason, that concept really struck a chord in other writers, and you can directly see her influence in many books, including George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, Christopher Paolini's Aragon, Naomi Novik's His Majesty's Dragon, Cressida Cowell's How to Train Your Dragon, and on and on. Even Brandon Sanderson credits McCaffrey as an influence. And if anyone should hold the title of Mother of Dragons, well, it ought to be Anne McCaffrey.
Number 3.
Anne McCaffrey had some stereotypical views on homosexuality, maybe based on the generation she grew up in. Certainly, I don't think there is any animus involved, and many gay male science fiction readers fell in love with her green dragons because green dragons would only bond with women and gay males. Dragons, specifically for gay males, what? Her world showed acceptance of different sexualities early on, and before you bring it up, I don't believe that tent peg story.
Number 2.
Anne McCaffrey's father, Colonel George Herbert McCaffrey, was a bit of a war hero. Though she calls him a brilliant scholar, having received a doctorate in government from Harvard, he served as an officer in the 78th Lightning Division Infantry in World War I. During World War II, he was recalled to duty as a lieutenant colonel and assigned as quartermaster. When he went overseas, the Navy convoy he was on was attacked by Nazi submarines, and he ended up in a lifeboat during the brutal 1.5-hour attack. He was the first man off the first landing tank that landed in Licata, Sicily, and in fact, there is a bridge named after her father in Sicily, Pont de Caffreo, after the Black Night when he was returning to base and suddenly had a premonition to stop. It turned out he stopped 2 feet before a chasm where the original bridge had collapsed. Did Anne McCaffrey come from a family with second sight? She never ruled it out.
Number 1.
Anne McCaffrey's son, Todd McCaffrey, continued the Dragonriders of Pern books. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think I've actually read a Todd McCaffrey book, but many of them were published as being co-authored with Anne McCaffrey, and some crediting Todd as the sole author. It kind of makes sense because Todd, who was Anne's oldest of 3 children, would accompany his mother when she met with editors and publishers and other writers. He was going to conventions since he was 12, and it's kind of nice to know that her legacy is living on. So that wraps up my 10 little-known facts of Anne McCaffrey. I'll have a link below to her online autobiography, and of course you can pick up her much longer autobiography in book form. But I want to know what books you've read by Anne McCaffrey. Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also let me know if there's other science fiction authors you want me to do a deep dive into. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.